So, congratulations to the People's Republic of China for putting their first module of their space station into orbit. It was an amazing thing to see. And actually, if you read some of the stats about this module, it blows your mind. This thing is 16.6 meters long, 4.2 meters in diameter, and comes in at 22 metric tons. That is much, much bigger and heavier than any module on the ISS. What an accomplishment. And the PRC does not intend to mess around with this thing. The Tianhe, or Harmony of the Heavens, or Heavenly Harmony as it is called, and I'm going to tell you why that name is so ironic in my opening remarks, but it's going to be occupied in June. First of all, they're going to send up an uncrewed cargo spacecraft called the Tianzhou 2, and that's going to rendezvous with the space station, providing the necessary cargo and supplies in May, and then in June, 3 taikonauts are going to visit this space station aboard the Shenzhou 12. But of course, in the middle of all of this triumph, there's a little detail that the Chinese government never really talked about, and that's the fact that they have no plan to control the re-entry of the massive booster required to put this huge module into orbit, and so it's going to re-enter the atmosphere uncontrolled, raining debris all over the place. And this thing weighs 7 times as much as the Falcon 9 booster that came down recently, dumping fuel tanks over somebody's farm, I believe it was in Washington State, by accident. But this was no accident. This is something they could have avoided, and obviously they just didn't care. And it is this attitude that concerns me and leads me to wonder, what does China intend to do with this station? It's not international. It's not a collaboration of nations designed for the peace of humanity the way the ISS is. It's something that could be entirely different. What could China do with this capability and the rest of their capabilities? And what could we do to stop it? Well, there's actually a lot of things that we could do to counter it, but the US Congress is clearly not interested. And let me tell you something, I'm angry as hell. Get ready for a special episode of The Angry Astronaut. Good morning, guys, and welcome to another episode of The Angry Astronaut from Boca Chica, actually from Harlingen to be precise. The Starship, as we all know, has not yet taken off. I have stayed a few extra days with you guys' support. Thank you so very much for that, and I really hope that I can give you something in return. But it has been about 2 months since anybody has seen a Starship fly, because SN11 was seen by nobody. It was just mostly heard more than anything else. So it's been a while, really, since anybody's had a chance to see a Starship take off. And I hope I am one of the lucky few that gets to see this live here from Texas. Okay, enough of that. That's not what this is about. It's about the Chinese space station. Why am I so pissed off? Why am I so angry about it? I mean, it's a huge accomplishment, right? It's mankind putting a second permanent presence, or, relatively permanent. It's supposed to be up there for decades, into orbit. It increases the presence of the human species in orbit. What's the problem with that? Why do I have an issue with the Tianhe module, the heavenly harmony, as it's said in Chinese? Why would I have an issue about that? Well, they're not off to a really good start, because the heavenly harmony should actually be called heavenly wrath, because the top stage of the Long March rocket that sent it up there is coming back down into our atmosphere uncontrolled. And this thing is 7 times as heavy as a Falcon 9 booster. The thing is colossal, and it's going to create a gigantic debris field. Maybe it'll burn up over the ocean. Maybe it won't. It's just a big, big crapshoot, and it is very irresponsible. The Chinese very easily could have set up some sort of reaction control thruster system on that stage, with a separate fuel system or something, to where they could push it back into the atmosphere at a time of their choosing, which would allow it to burn up definitely over an ocean. They certainly would have that capability. They just didn't bother. They just don't care. They don't give a. And that is really what bothers me. It's the fact that they're already starting out with a complete disregard for the safety of human lives. And that really disturbs me, given their track record on human rights, given the fact that people in Hong Kong who demonstrate for the simple right of having a voice in their own government, something that Hong Kong used to be accustomed to, something that they used to have a voice in at one point, and don't really have it anymore. And any protest that's been made in Hong Kong, and then obviously the thing with Tiananmen, much longer time ago, back in the 90s, that was horrific and has been completely suppressed by the Chinese media. If you ask the average 20-something-year-old Chinese person in Beijing, what do you think about Tiananmen? They won't even know what you're talking about. If you show them a picture of that tank and the protesters standing in front of it, they'll say, "Oh my God, was that man Chinese?" They will have no idea what you're talking about, because that is how thoroughly they have suppressed any effort to create democracy in their country. And that's just one of a huge list of offenses. And so what bothers me is not that the Chinese have put up an additional human presence in orbit, but what they could theoretically do with that presence, and the fact that the US government is doing nothing about it, doing nothing to respond to it, or virtually nothing. It's being left to private enterprise almost exclusively to counter the Chinese effort in low Earth orbit. The ISS is going to be retired sometime, and if something doesn't replace it, the Chinese will have complete dominance of LEO and beyond that as well. But I'm not going to keep ranting on about this right now. We're going to learn about it in this video right now. Now, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This is all speculation, what I'm about to say. Things that China theoretically could do with this station and their space program if left unchecked. There is no evidence to support that this is actually what they're going to do. Just their past behavior makes me suspicious. But in any event, the station is designed to A, provide living space for the taikonauts, and B, laboratory space to carry out scientific experiments and presumably microgravity manufacturing experiments as well. Now, the Shenzhou will provide transportation for the taikonauts up to the station, whereas the Tianzhou will provide transportation for the cargo. Now, in theory, the Tianzhou can carry a hell of a lot of cargo, over a metric ton more than either Cargo Dragon or the future Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser, 6,500 kilograms. That is, of course, assuming that the rocket that carries it, the Long March 7, is capable of launching that much cargo, and the Chinese aren't telling as to whether or not that's really doable. But that's a lot of cargo, certainly more than a small space station should need at this point, but nevertheless, that's what it can do. However, it's disposable, and so is the rocket that launches it. Extremely expensive, extremely wasteful. But hey, given the size of the first space station module, it's obvious that China doesn't care about going big and spending money. And that applies to their crew module as well. It's similar to the Soyuz, but larger, capable of carrying more payload, but 3 astronauts similar to the Soyuz in many ways. Nevertheless, it is an upgraded, upgunned version of the Soyuz with 3 particular elements. So the first of these elements is the service module, which was developed by the Shanghai Academy of Space Technology. It provides propulsion for the spacecraft in orbit, along with electrical power and its control, reaction control thrusters, that sort of thing. It's similar to what's used on the Soyuz, but it's longer and it has a greater diameter. It also has 2 solar panels that provide significantly more power than the Soyuz does, giving it a lot more independent operation. It's actually a pretty good ship. Now, the second element is the Orbital Module, where all the magic happens. This is where the crew live during the time that they're in space, conduct their experiments. There's an airlock in here for EVAs, but most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, is the first mission that the Chinese undertook almost 20 years ago, actually over 20 years ago, was a military mission, and they utilized 2 different types of military experiments with this flight. Firstly, in terms of tracking sources of enemy radar for intelligence purposes, for example, radar that might be used for anti-aircraft batteries. Once you identify those and knock them out, you eliminate an enemy's ability to defend itself from air attack. And the second package that they had on board was reconnaissance, visual reconnaissance, utilizing advanced optics from orbit, focusing in on targets like American carrier groups. So my point is, the very first manned mission flown by this ship was not for science, not for astrophysics, but for military reconnaissance. Do we really believe that a space station run exclusively by the Chinese is going to be run for peaceful purposes alone? Now, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think we would be foolish to not at least consider the possibility. Now, the last of the elements of this particular spacecraft is, of course, the Reentry Module, which is very similar to the Soyuz. Now, this module, of course, has a heat shield. It's comprised of a titanium frame with aluminum side walls, and aside from that, it's 6 cubic meters in size for 3 people. That is a tight squeeze, just like it is with the Soyuz. They're definitely not much in for comfort, but, it's not a very long re-entry process, so not that bad when it comes down to it. And like the Russians, they set down on hard ground rather than in the water, making a landing a lot rougher on their taikonauts. And to be completely fair, every NASA astronaut who has interacted with one of these people have said that they are very easy to work with and very open to collaborating. I'm not worried about these people. I'm worried about the government that gives them their orders. But let's have a look at the station itself in detail. The module that's been deployed right now, that's going to be used for habitation primarily, but probably for experiments almost right away this summer, is right here. This module will in turn be followed by the Mengqiang and the Wenqiang, both of which are experimental laboratories. Now, these modules are covered in docking ports, and the whole thing is very expandable. You could take this T-shaped station and attach a whole additional T-shaped station onto the thing and just keep building it if you wanted to. It has the potential to become the largest thing that has ever flown in space, although currently it is smaller than the ISS. But here's my question. Without international oversight, what happens if they decide to develop, say, some kind of new type of carbon fiber armor in microgravity? Something that would work really well for their armored divisions. Carbon fiber is manufactured far more efficiently and far better in microgravity conditions than you can manufacture it on Earth. So imagine what military applications could be put into practice on this station without international oversight. And while you're at it, why stop at simple military applications like tanks? What about biological weapons? I had an opportunity to discuss the subject of positive biological technologies that can be developed in microgravity recently with Axiom Space.
Some of the early discoveries that are coming out of Space Station in biology, for example, are, stem cells behave interestingly different in space, and there's some early evidence that they maintain, quote unquote, their stemminess longer. You can imagine if you can maintain a eternal pluripotent line of stem cells in orbit, or more importantly, or maybe even more attractively, you can fly individual person stem cells to orbit and maintain a cell bank, so to speak, where you can derive therapies and treatments for that patient when they get sick on the ground and bring those back to treat that patient. There's some really compelling opportunities in that sphere in and around individualized medicine. You can grow cells in a more biologically and physiologically relevant three-dimensional structures in space. And you imagine growing cells on a petri dish in gravity, they spread out in a 2D layer, but in space they can grow into the three-dimensional structures that they tend to do in the body. And then that provides all sorts of interesting opportunities for things like tissue on a chip, lab on a chip systems, the ability to perhaps fly your cancer cells to orbit and grow them in a biologically relevant way to assess which cocktail of medications is going to be most effective on those cells, and immediately transfer that data to ground for treatment in the hospital. So those are just a couple interesting plays. 3D bioprinting in the same idea, in the same vein there, is also really attractive, because in gravity you try to print complex three-dimensional tissues and they turn into soggy puddles on the bottom of the printer. In microgravity you can print these structures with vasculature and different layers of kinds of tissue and cells, and then you can let them mature in a gravity-free environment, and then you can bring those home and use those as implants, ultimately maybe even yielding full organs that you can bring home for transplant.
Holy sign me up. But at the same time, Congress is not behind this concept. This, by the way, is a perspective or a future view of what Axiom wants to eventually build. Look at that magnificent station and all of the important work that could be done there. And NASA requested $150 million to just get them started, and Congress gave them $17 million. And yet, what you're looking at right now are bulkheads that have been built by Thales Alenia in Europe by Axiom Space because they've determined accurately that they can't count on the American government to back them up, so they're paying for this station themselves. Inexcusable. But even with all the private funding that Axiom has received for this station, this first module, this one right here, is not going to be deployed for another 2 years. One module, and in the meantime, the Chinese will have a completed space station. Now, once again, if they want to use it for peaceful purposes, that's fine, but it's not going to have any sort of oversight. Now, look at this completed station, by the way, from Axiom, complete with solar array, a free-flying station with a crew of 6, capable of doing amazing work, won't be done until almost the end of the decade. And I like to call this the zero-G hot tub, by the way. A unbelievable environment to observe the beauty of Earth and the universe around us. I'd love to serve on this station, but the point I'm trying to make is even though positive things definitely could be done on the Chinese station, other sorts of nightmares could be created there as well. Just as you can create biological miracles in microgravity, you can also weaponize microgravity to a terrifying extent. Who knows what sorts of bioweapons could be created on a space station where everything can be conducted in secret. That's why I prefer the whole concept of either an international space station or a privatized space station where you have astronauts from many countries overseeing the work being done, making sure that no weapons of mass destruction are being created in space. And yet, that's what we have happening right now. And here's another one for you. Just as nanoracks can deploy CubeSats from the ISS as they're doing right here, you could also deploy anti-sat weaponry using exactly the same principle. And this sort of weapon would create no thermal signature, no heat trail to track, and virtually no radar signature, which would give the Chinese the ability to knock out enemy satellites in a stealth mode, essentially, and that is a frightening prospect as well. So many military applications that could be undertaken from a space station that haven't been done so far because we have an international endeavor with the ISS, but that has changed for good at this point, and something needs to be done about it, and nobody is doing a damn thing. No one, that is, except nanoracks themselves or Sierra Nevada and this particular concept of a lunar space station with an inflatable module similar to what Bigelow Aerospace had come up with. And SNC has the advantage of servicing that station with their own spacecraft, the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser. I made a video about that not that long ago. But we're expecting these private companies to compete with an entire nation of over 1 billion people with all of these resources and all of this money and determination, while the ISS slowly fades away as the astronauts on board have to do so much more work maintaining this aging station as opposed to doing important scientific work. And eventually, sooner rather than later, this station is going to have to be decommissioned. Are we then going to hand low Earth orbit over to China? I certainly hope not. Now look, all of this is pure speculation, nothing more, okay? The Chinese may very well have purely scientific and purely peaceful intentions in what they're doing in space. Could very well be the case. there's so many things about what they do that concern me. Their disregard for human safety as far as their space program is concerned. The fact that it's part of their military, which is unique. That's even the Russian space agency, the Roscosmos, is not part of the military. It's a civilian agency. There are so many things about the Chinese space ambitions that scream militarization. They've hacked United States defense satellites. There are so many things that the Chinese have already done with their current capabilities that suggest that, given an opportunity, if they had complete dominance in low Earth orbit and in lunar space, I think they would make use of it. When I was studying Chinese history, it was actually one of my, the focuses that I had when I was in college. Nobody thought that China was going to be anything like this. They always looked upon them as this big behemoth that, may have had tons of people, but could never really get anything done. That's how they were viewed for so long. And oh, wow, dear God, did the world underestimate them. And props to the Chinese, by the way, for accomplishing everything that they have. It is amazing. From building more miles of highway than any country on the planet when they had no highways in the 1980s, that much progress in that little time. It's simply astonishing, and a testament to the strength of the Chinese people, to their ability to get things done. That I find impressive. What I do not find impressive is how they accomplish it and how little voice that these hardworking people have in their own government and in their own fate. And that is unacceptable. And to give a country like that complete control of low Earth orbit and lunar space is also unacceptable. And this needs to stop. And what totally sucks, I despise this whole concept, is that the private industry have pretty much been left to their own devices to get this done, especially when it comes to space stations. Congress is not giving them, as you saw in the video, anywhere near the money that they need. Not even close. And this needs to change, and it needs to change now. If you like the way that I talk about things, if you like the way that I rant, then you know how to support me. It's all in the description. I certainly, appreciate all the support I've received to keep me here in Boca Chica much longer than I anticipated. And I really hope to see SN15 take off. I hope that they are able to finally get this thing off the ground and light that candle. So until we have a valid replacement to the ISS, an international space station, therefore an international effort in space, which means collaboration instead of competition and conflict. Until this becomes a reality, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.